My son called to inform me they were moving me into the Lilac Meadows Assisted Living Facility and that the intake forms were already signed. The receiver felt suddenly heavy, a dead weight in my hand, and it slipped from my numb fingers to clatter against the polished wood of the hall table, a sharp, ugly sound in the quiet of my house. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis, the floral pattern of the runner on the floorboards swimming before my eyes. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 82 years old. But there was something they didn't know, something sealed away behind the quiet facade of my life, a warmth they couldn't comprehend because they only saw the ice. To understand why my son would do such a thing and why I let him believe he could, you have to understand the life I lived with his father, Robert. To understand the end, you must begin with the love. Robert and I met when the world was a different color. Or perhaps it was just that we were young and everything seemed saturated with a light that has since faded. He was a graduate student in physics, all sharp angles and even sharper intellect, with a mind that danced in realms I could barely imagine. I was a librarian, my world built of paper and ink, of stories bound in leather and cloth. He saw the universe in equations. I saw it in narratives. We found, to our mutual surprise, that we were looking at the same thing. We started with nothing. Our first apartment was a cramped third-floor walk-up above a bakery in a part of town that was more grit than charm. The air, morning and night, smelled of yeast and sugar, a scent I still associate with the purest form of happiness. Our first piece of furniture was a dining table Robert bought for $2 at a junk shop. It had a wobbly leg and a surface scarred with the history of other families. He spent a week sanding it down by hand, refinishing it, securing the leg with a bracket he engineered himself. When he was done, it was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it was ours, made steady by his own hands. That was Robert. He didn't just fix things, he understood them from their foundational principles and made them stronger. He became a professor at the local university, a man in a rumpled corduroy jacket with chalk dust permanently embedded in the fibers of his cuffs. He was beloved by his students, not because he was easy, but because he made them see the magic in the mundane. He could explain quantum mechanics using the ripples in a coffee cup, or thermodynamics with the condensation on a cold glass of water. He was a poet of the physical world. While other men had hobbies like fishing or golf, Robert had the stock market. But he didn't approach it like a gambler. He called it his practical application lab. He never read the Wall Street Journal's front page. He read obscure scientific papers and patent filings. He wasn't investing in companies. He was investing in ideas, in the soundness of the physics behind a new technology. "Look at this, Ellie," he'd say, his eyes alight, pointing to a dense article in a journal I couldn't even pronounce. "This little company in California, they've figured out a way to draw glass fibers so pure that light can travel for miles with almost no signal loss. Total internal reflection. It's elegant. It's the future of communication." He took a few $1,000s from our meager savings, money that made my own heart clench with anxiety, and bought shares in a company no one had ever heard of. That company was a precursor to the giants that would lay the fiber optic cables crisscrossing the globe. He did it again with a small firm working on lithium-ion energy storage. "The chemistry is sound," he explained, sketching diagrams on a napkin at our wobbly, beloved kitchen table. The energy density is revolutionary. Everything that isn't plugged into a wall will one day use this. He was right. Laptops, phones, electric cars, all of it grew from the seed of that idea he saw so clearly. He never sold a single share. He funneled the dividends, the splits, the explosive growth into a blind trust managed by a former student of his, a quiet, brilliant young man named David Chen, who had gone into law and finance. Robert trusted David's integrity as much as he trusted the laws of thermodynamics. "This isn't for us, Ellie," he'd say whenever I'd look at the quarterly statements with a dizzying mix of awe and terror. "This is our what-if fund. What if the world turns upside down? This is our gravity. It's the anchor." He kept his professor's salary. We lived in our modest, comfortable house, and the numbers in that trust grew into a silent, parallel universe of wealth we never touched. Then came Michael, our son. He was a beautiful baby, a bright, inquisitive child who inherited my love for stories and his father's curiosity. I have a memory so clear it feels like I could step back into it. Michael is 4, and we are in a field behind our house. Robert has built a kite, a complex diamond shape with a long, stabilizing tail. He's explaining to Michael, in his simple, patient way, about the principles of lift, the Bernoulli effect, how the curve of the kite forces the air to travel faster over the top, creating a pressure differential. Michael isn't listening to the words, of course. He's just watching his father's face, bathed in the warm afternoon sun, his small hand gripping the string, feeling the impossible tug of the wind. For a moment, the three of us were a perfect system, balanced and whole. I tried to give Michael everything. Perhaps that was my mistake. I wanted his life to be easier than ours had been. When he chose a private university, we paid for it without a second thought, cashing in some of the smaller personal investments I managed outside of Robert's great trust. When he wanted to get his MBA, I wrote the check. It felt like an investment in his happiness. The real shift began when he met Chloe. She was polished. That was the first word that came to mind. She walked into our lives like a character from a glossy magazine, all sharp angles, expensive fabrics, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was an event planner, a profession that seemed to perfectly suit her talent for arranging people and things to her liking. Their first visit to our home was a master class in subtle condescension. The house Robert and I had filled with books, memories, and love was, to her, a project in need of renovation. "Oh, Eleanor, your home is so authentic," she said, running a manicured finger over the worn arm of Robert's favorite reading chair. The air in the room seemed to chill. "It's like a little time capsule. So cozy." Cozy was her word for small. Authentic was her word for old. She surveyed my collection of first edition novels, not as a library, but as cluttered shelves. She came from a family that had lost everything in a bad business deal when she was a teenager. I learned this later, in pieces, from Michael. They had gone from a large house in a gated community to a small apartment overnight. She had watched her mother be humiliated, forced to use coupons, to accept the thinly veiled pity of former friends. Chloe had spent her entire adult life running from that memory, constructing a fortress of brand names and social status to protect herself from the specter of that shame. I understood her fear. I truly did. But understanding why a person is cruel does not make the cruelty any less sharp. She began to work on Michael, sanding down his softer edges, replacing his comfortable, well-worn ambitions with her own gleaming, hollow ones. He had wanted to be a history teacher. Chloe convinced him that his talents were wasted on such a noble but impractical profession. With his new MBA, he went into finance, a field for which he had no passion, but which provided the income Chloe's lifestyle demanded. The financial ledger began then, a slow, steady drain on the life Robert and I had built. It started with their wedding. Chloe wanted a fairy tale. The venue alone cost more than Robert's salary for a year. I offered them the money I had set aside for my own retirement fund, the librarian's pension I had so carefully nurtured. It wasn't enough. "Eleanor," Chloe had said, her voice a careful blend of warmth and steel, over tea in a cafe that smelled of perfume and money. "We know this is a lot to ask, but this isn't just a party. It's the foundation of our life together. It's about showing the world, our families, our colleagues, that we are starting from a place of strength." I wrote the check, $100,000. It felt like I was signing away a part of myself. Then came the house. They found a sprawling new construction in a suburb called Crestwood, a place of identical mini-mansions with 3-car garages and perfectly manicured lawns. It was far beyond their means. Michael called me, his voice strained. "Mom, we found our dream home, but the down payment, it's astronomical. Chloe is heartbroken. She says we'll never have a real family home." I remembered the little apartment above the bakery, the joy of that wobbly table. A home wasn't about square footage, but I looked at the photograph on my mantel of Michael as a boy, with his gap-toothed, trusting smile. I wanted him to be happy. I dipped into the account Robert had labeled the foundation. It was meant for charity, for building things. What better foundation, I rationalized to myself, than my son's family? I wired them $350,000. The bank officer looked at me with concern. I just smiled and said it was a gift. The list grew over the years, a litany of their wants and my acquiescence. $20,000 for a desperately needed trip to Europe after Michael was passed over for a promotion. He needs to recharge, to feel successful again, Chloe had explained. $15,000 for the down payment on her Lexus, because image is everything in my line of work, Eleanor. You understand. $10,000 a year for their country club membership, a place where they could network with the right people. And then there were the loans that were never loans, the monthly help with the bills that became an expectation. Each time it was a phone call. Michael's hesitant, guilt-ridden preamble, followed by Chloe's clear, logical-sounding justification, usually delivered with her hand on his arm, her voice of firm presence in the background. I could hear her coaching him, feeding him lines. They were a team, and their project was me. I kept a small, leather-bound notebook. In it, I wrote down every amount. Not out of resentment, not at first. It was just my librarian's way of keeping track. But over time, the pages filled. The ink began to look like blood. The total, the last time I had dared to add it up, was over $600,000. $600,000 poured into a life that looked impressive from the outside, but felt, to me, hollow and cold. Robert had been gone for 5 years when the final betrayal came. He had fought a quiet, dignified battle with cancer. In his last days, he was lucid, his physicist's mind clear to the end. He took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice raspy. My anchor. He gave me a small, heavy brass key. The safe deposit box. David Chen has the other key. Don't open it unless you have to. Only when you need to remember who you are, not just who they think you are. He passed away a week later, leaving a hole in the universe that I could feel in the very marrow of my bones. I put the key in a small locked box on my dresser, a box that held my wedding ring and a lock of Michael's baby hair. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to have to. I wanted to believe that the love we had built, the family we had created, was stronger than any what if. I wanted to believe my son still saw me as his mother, not just a line of credit. I chose to live my simple life, to be the quiet, unassuming widow. I let them believe I was a little dotty, a little out of touch, managing on a small pension. I let them see me as a relic, a cozy, authentic woman in a time capsule house. It was easier for them that way. It made their request for money feel less like exploitation and more like a necessary stipend for a woman who simply didn't understand the modern cost of living. My simplicity became their justification. My humility became their weapon. And so there I was, standing in my hallway, the dial tone buzzing from the phone on the floor, the glossy pamphlet for Lilac Meadows Assisted Living catching the afternoon light. It showed a group of silver-haired seniors, their smiles wide and vacant, gathered around a bingo board. The tagline read, "Graceful living for your golden years." The words from the phone call echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the house. Michael's voice, thin and reedy, cracking with a guilt he wasn't strong enough to act upon. "Mom, it's for the best. You're alone in that big house. We worry." Then Chloe's voice, sharp and clear, in the background. "Tell her about the amenities, Michael. The 24-hour nursing staff." "They have activities, Mom. And Chloe has looked at the facility. It's top-notch. The intake forms. We just signed them. It takes the burden off you." The burden. The word hung in the air. The burden of my own life. The burden of my own home. The one Robert and I had filled with 40 years of love and laughter. The home where I had raised him. They had taken my money, my support, my unconditional love. And in return, they had decided I was a burden to be managed, an inconvenience to be institutionalized. The pamphlet slipped from the table and fluttered to the floor. It landed face up. Roses. The manicured gardens were supposed to have roses. I bent to pick it up, my knees creaking. My hand trembled, not from age, but from a cold, seismic shock. I looked at the smiling faces, the promise of graceful living, and I saw a cage, a comfortable, well-appointed, and utterly soul-destroying cage. The grief I thought I would feel, the hot tears of a betrayed mother, didn't come. Instead, something else settled in its place, a quiet, cold stillness, the kind of absolute zero where all molecular motion ceases. It was a feeling of perfect, terrible clarity. The ice wasn't something they were putting me on. It was something I was finally embracing. It was a shield. It was armor. For years I had kept my windows open to them, letting them take the warmth from my home, from my heart, believing that my love was an infinite resource. Now I understood. They didn't want my warmth. They just wanted the fuel. I walked from the hallway into my quiet living room, the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. I looked at the photograph of Robert on the mantel, his kind eyes seeming to hold a question. I had my answer. I went to my bedroom, to the small, locked box on my dresser. My hands were steady now. I took out the heavy brass key Robert had given me. It felt cool and solid in my palm. The weight of it was a promise. It was time to open the box. It was time to remember who I was. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that feels like a fresh start. I called Mr. David Chen. His voice was exactly as I remembered from the last time we'd spoken at Robert's funeral, calm, measured, and kind. "Mrs. Vance," he said, a note of pleasant surprise in his tone. "It's good to hear from you. Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to be, David," I replied, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I need to see you, and I need to visit the bank. Robert left me a key." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was not a long pause, but it was freighted with understanding. "Of course, Mrs. Vance, I'll clear my schedule. Shall we meet at my office in an hour?" Mr. Chen's office was not what I expected. In a city of glass towers and ostentatious displays of wealth, his was in a modest, older building with a brass-caged elevator. The office itself smelled of leather, old paper, and freshly brewed coffee. It was a scent of quiet competence. He was a man in his early 50s now, with kind eyes and the same quiet intensity I remembered from his youth. He greeted me not with pity, but with a deep, respectful warmth. He called me Mrs. Vance, not Eleanor. It was a small thing, but it was a restoration of dignity I hadn't realized I was missing. He listened without interruption as I told him everything. The phone call, Lilac Meadows, the years of financial gifts. I spoke in a flat, even tone, laying out the facts as a librarian would catalog a collection. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his hands clasped on his large oak desk. He didn't offer platitudes. He offered something better. "My own grandmother, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice soft but firm, "was taken advantage of by a predatory financial advisor in her final years. He convinced her she was a burden to the family and drained her life savings. I was just a law student, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I promised myself then that I would never let that happen to anyone I could help. Robert was a great man. He foresaw contingencies. Let's honor his foresight." That one small personal story forged a bond of trust between us that was stronger than any legal retainer. He was not just a lawyer, he was an ally. From his office, we went to the bank. The vault was a world of its own, cold and silent, smelling of steel and recycled air. A young attendant led us to a wall of gleaming metal doors. David produced his key, I produced mine. The lock turned with a satisfying heavy click. The attendant pulled out the long, surprisingly heavy box and placed it on a small table in a private viewing room. He closed the door behind us, leaving us in the hushed, sterile quiet. My heart was hammering against my ribs. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to lift the lid. What if Robert's grand experiment had failed? What if the market had crashed? What if it was all just paper? David seemed to sense my hesitation. "Robert chose his principles well, Mrs. Vance. Physics and integrity. They're both reliable." I lifted the lid. Inside, on top of a thick stack of documents, was a single, sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Robert's familiar angular script. Beneath it were the portfolio statements, bound neatly by year. I picked up the topmost one, the most recent quarter. My eyes scanned the columns of familiar company names, the fiber optic pioneers, the battery innovators, and others I didn't even recognize. And then I saw the number at the bottom of the page, the total market value. The numbers seemed to blur, to dance, I had to put my hand on the table to steady myself. I sank onto the small, hard stool beside the table, the breath leaving my body in a rush. It felt as though the floor had dropped away and I was floating. "Mrs. Vance, are you all right?" David's voice was gentle. I couldn't speak. I just slid the statement across the table to him. He picked it up. His eyes widened just for a second before his professional composure returned. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "it seems Professor Vance's hobby was quite successful. The number was $47,821,544.32. The specificity of the cents was what made it real. It wasn't an abstraction. It was an accounting. The contrast was dizzying. The $500,000 I had given away, money that had felt like amputating a limb each time, was barely a rounding error in this vast, silent ocean of wealth. The power of it, the sheer scale of it, was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was a voice. It was power. I reached for the letter from Robert, my fingers trembling slightly. I didn't open it. Not yet. I held it to my chest. This was for later. This was for me. The portfolio was for them. The journey back from the bank was a blur. The world outside the car window looked the same, but it wasn't. I was different. The cold, hard knot of ice in my chest had not melted. Instead, it had solidified, crystallized into something sharp and beautiful, like a diamond. Back in Mr. Chen's office, the plan formed quickly. He was a master of his craft, efficient and ruthless in the way only a truly good lawyer can be. "First," he said, making notes on a yellow legal pad, "we establish your absolute control. We will draft a new, irrevocable power of attorney, naming me as your agent, effective immediately. This will supersede any previous documents your son might have had you sign. Second, we freeze everything. You mentioned automatic transfers. We will cancel them. We will put a flag on all your accounts. Nothing moves without your explicit, verbal confirmation to me personally. Third, we go on the offensive. This Lilac Meadows facility, they have your signature on an intake form. We will inform them in no uncertain terms that this was done under duress and without your full consent or legal counsel, and that any attempt to act on it will be met with a lawsuit that will bankrupt their parent company. They will back down. And finally," he said, looking up at me, his eyes dark with purpose, "we wait. They will get loud. They will get desperate. And they will make mistakes. We let them." The next few days were a quiet whirlwind. The first call was to a locksmith. He was an older man named Sal, with hands gnarled from years of working with metal and tumblers. As he fitted the new heavy-duty deadbolts on my doors, he didn't ask any questions. The smell of metal shavings filled my porch. "There you are, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on a rag and handing me a set of shiny new keys. "Solid brass, hard to drill." He paused, looking at my face, and seemed to see more than just a client. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "new locks don't keep bad people out. They just give you a good reason to call the police when they try to get in. It's not about the lock. It's about the boundary." He tipped his cap and was gone, leaving me with that small, hard piece of wisdom. Mr. Chen was as good as his word. A single phone call from him to Lilac Meadows was all it took. The facility, it turned out, was part of a large, publicly traded elder care corporation. The last thing they wanted was a lawsuit alleging elder coercion. The intake forms were shredded. The first sign of the fallout came 3 days later. It was a frantic phone call from Michael. "Mom, Mom, are you there?" His voice was high-pitched, panicked. "The transfer, it didn't go through. For the mortgage, it didn't go through. It's due today." For the first time in years, I felt no compulsion to soothe him, to solve his problem. I let the silence stretch. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, dear," I said, my voice calm and even. I had practiced it in the mirror. It was the voice of a pleasant but distant acquaintance. But, but how? We were counting on it. She's going crazy." "Is she?" I said, examining a fingernail. "Well, you give her my best." And I hung up. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had heard in a decade. The next escalation came from Chloe, as I knew it would. A week later, a thick envelope arrived by courier. It was from a law firm, one of the big, expensive ones downtown, with a name made of a long string of surnames. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly venomous. It spoke of their deep concern for my well-being. It mentioned my recent erratic financial behavior and my increasing isolation. It delicately, but unmistakably, raised the possibility of petitioning the court for a conservatorship to protect me from myself, to protect my assets. I didn't even have to open it. I saw the return address and simply forwarded a photo of the envelope to Mr. Chen. His reply came via text a few hours later. "Handled," it said. He later read me the letter he had sent in response. It was a work of art. It began by acknowledging their filial concern, then proceeded to systematically dismantle their position, citing the specific statutes on elder abuse and financial coercion in our state. It concluded by informing them that I had retained counsel, that my faculties were perfectly intact, and that any further attempts to harass or intimidate me would be met with the full and overwhelming force of the law. It also included a crisp, notarized copy of my new power of attorney, naming him as my agent. It was, in legal terms, a declaration of war. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week after that. Michael called again. His tone was different this time. Not panicked, but hollow, beaten. "Mom," he began, "look, I know you're angry." "I'm not angry, Michael," I said truthfully. I was long past anger. I was in a place of cold, crystalline purpose. "Okay, well, Chloe, she's being honored at the annual hospital charity gala. Rising star in philanthropy or something. She's giving the keynote speech." He paused, and I could hear Chloe's sharp whisper in the background. She said it would look good if you were there, for family unity." There it was, the stage, the audience, the perfect public trap. Chloe, the master event planner, had just planned her own downfall. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice as soft and pliable as it had ever been. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The week leading up to the gala was the hardest. The cold clarity of my purpose was a strong fortress, but grief is a patient tide, and it found the cracks. One evening, I was sorting through a box of old photographs, looking for one of Robert for a new frame. I came across a picture of Michael. He was 5 years old, asleep on my lap, his face rosy with a fever he'd been fighting. I remember the smell of his hair, the damp warmth of his small body, the absolute, unconditional trust in the weight of his head on my shoulder. I held the photograph, my thumb tracing the outline of his small, sleeping face. A wave of sorrow, so profound it was physical, washed over me. It felt like drowning. Was this worth it? This cold, calculated revenge? Was it worth shattering the man he had become, and in doing so, destroying the memory of the innocent boy in the photograph? For a moment, I doubted everything. The diamond in my chest felt like a shard of glass. I put the picture down and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. In the reflection, I saw a frail-looking old woman, her face etched with grief. Was this who I was now? A lonely, vengeful crone, plotting the destruction of her own family? Then, as if summoned, I heard Chloe's voice in my head, as clear as if she were in the room. Lilac Meadows. It takes the burden off you, and Michael's weak assent. The tide of grief receded. The cold returned, not as a comfort, but as a necessity, a tool. I was not destroying my son. I was showing him the consequences of his choices. I was holding up a mirror to the life he and his wife had built, a life built on a foundation of my silent sacrifices. I went to my closet. I bypassed the few nice dresses I owned, the ones I wore to the occasional luncheon or symphony performance. Instead, my hand fell on a simple, charcoal gray sheath dress. It was timeless, well made, and I had owned it for 20 years. It was the dress of a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, who had nothing to prove. It was my armor. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass one more time. The frail old woman was gone. In her place was Eleanor Vance, Robert's wife, Michael's mother, and the silent, unseen anchor of a $47 million fortune. I was ready. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers, vast as constellations, dripped light onto a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and the cloying sweetness of ambition. The sound was a carefully orchestrated hum of clinking glasses, discreet laughter, and the murmur of people who believed they were the center of the universe. I arrived alone, stepping out of a simple taxi. I had my keys, my phone, and in my old canvas tote bag with its faded museum logo, a single heavy object. I handed my coat, a simple wool peacoat I'd owned for a decade, to a startled attendant who was used to handling mink and cashmere. I walked into the ballroom in my simple gray dress and sensible shoes. I was a rock of granite in a river of glitter. I saw heads turn, eyes flicker over me with dismissal, then move on. I was invisible, an irrelevant grandmother who had wandered into the wrong party. This was precisely what I had counted on. From across the room, I saw her. Chloe was holding court near the stage. She was incandescent, a star in her own right, wearing a shimmering, backless gown of silver sequins that clung to her like a second skin. She laughed, a practiced musical sound, touching a man's arm, tilting her head just so. She was a master of this universe. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a moment they met mine. Her smile faltered just for an instant. The practiced warmth vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure annoyance. She had invited me, but she had not expected me to actually come. Or perhaps she had expected me to be so intimidated I would huddle in a corner. She extricated herself from her circle of admirers and glided toward me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice a low, tight hiss beneath a veneer of social grace. "You came. How? Lovely." She looked at my dress, a faint, pitying smile on her lips. "You look so comfortable." "I am," I replied calmly. She gestured vaguely towards the back of the enormous room. "There's a lovely little table for you over there, near the kitchens. It will be quieter, so you won't be overwhelmed by all the noise." She was banishing me, marking me as insignificant, in front of anyone who might be watching. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice meek. "That's very thoughtful." I let a waiter guide me to the small, sad table, set for one, tucked away behind a large floral arrangement. I sat, smoothed my dress, and I waited. I watched as Michael, looking handsome but strained in his tuxedo, moved through the crowd, a fixed smile on his face. He avoided my gaze. The dinner was served. The speeches began. Finally, the main event. The president of the hospital board took the stage to introduce Chloe. He lauded her tireless dedication, her visionary leadership, her profound generosity. The applause was thunderous as she took the stage, bathed in a single, brilliant spotlight. She was magnificent. I had to give her that. She spoke with poise and passion about the importance of community, of giving back, of legacy. And then she came to the heart of her speech. "My husband, Michael, and I," she said, her voice catching with perfectly rehearsed emotion, "believe that the most important legacy we can build is one of family. And that starts with honoring those who came before us. It is our sacred duty to care for our elders, to ensure they live their golden years with dignity and grace." The room was rapt. People were dabbing their eyes. My son, Michael, looked up at her with an expression of pure adoration. She finished to a standing ovation. Flowers were presented. She stood there, beaming, accepting the adulation. It was her perfect moment. And then I stood up. I walked from my hidden table through the maze of tables toward the stage. The applause was just beginning to die down. A few people noticed me, a look of confusion on their faces. I was not on the program. I reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage. Chloe saw me. The brilliant smile froze on her face. A flicker of panic entered her eyes. I walked past her to the lectern, where the microphone was still live. The entire room was silent now, 1,000 pairs of eyes on me. My voice, when it came out, was not the voice of a frail, elderly woman. It was the voice of Eleanor Vance. It was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room. "That was a beautiful speech, Chloe," I began, my voice amplified, clear as a bell. "You spoke of legacy. It's something I've been thinking about a great deal lately." I turned to face the crowd, but my eyes were locked on Chloe. "My late husband, Robert, was a physicist. He believed in solid foundations. You and Michael have built such a beautiful life on the foundation I provided. That magnificent house in Crestwood, it's a testament to your success." I paused. "What was the down payment on that again, dear? Around $350,000, wasn't it?" A gasp rippled through the room. Chloe's face had gone ashen. Michael, at his table, looked like he was going to be sick. "And Michael's MBA," I continued, my voice calm and steady. "From that prestigious university, a wonderful investment in your future. $75,000, if I recall correctly. And the wedding, of course, a true fairy tale. $100,000, a small price to pay for such a perfect beginning." I ticked off the items, one by one. The trips, the cars, the country club. I wasn't angry. I was simply an accountant, reading a ledger. With each number, the silence in the room grew heavier, more profound. "I was just doing some of my own accounting the other day," I concluded, my voice dropping slightly, forcing everyone to lean in. "And I realized that over the past decade, the financial legacy I have provided for you totals $612,450. I let the number hang in the air. $612,000. In that moment of absolute ringing silence, a small, discreet drama was unfolding at Chloe's table. A waiter had approached Michael, holding a small black folder. There was a hushed, frantic exchange. Michael fumbled in his tuxedo jacket, pulling out a wallet. He produced a credit card. The waiter took it, disappeared, and returned a moment later, shaking his head. A woman at the next table, a notorious gossip columnist, whispered loudly to her companion, "His card was declined for the bar tab." The whisper spread through the room like a contagion. Chloe's carefully constructed world, her image of effortless wealth and success, had just shattered. Her face, which had been pale, was now a blotchy, mortified red. This was my moment. I walked calmly from the lectern to their head table. The entire room watched my slow, deliberate progress. I reached into my simple canvas tote bag. For a moment, I think they expected me to pull out a handkerchief. Instead, I pulled out a card. It was black, made of anodized titanium, heavy, sleek, and utterly unmistakable. The American Express Centurion card. The black card. An object of myth for people like Chloe, a symbol of a level of wealth so far beyond their aspirations they could barely comprehend it. I placed it on the table in front of Michael. It didn't clink. It landed with a solid, definitive thud. The sound was an exclamation point at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was the sound of reality. I looked directly at Chloe. Her sequined dress seemed to have lost its shimmer. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and, for the first time, a glimmer of terrified respect. My voice was a whisper, but everyone heard it. "You were right, Chloe. It is important to care for our elders. My husband taught me that true wealth isn't what you spend, it's what you build." I pushed the card a little closer to Michael. "Pay the man." Then I turned. I did not look back at my son's stricken face or at the ruins of his wife's social career. I walked with the same steady pace out of the ballroom, through the gilded lobby, and into the cool, clean air of the night. The silence followed me all the way to the door. The cold night air on my face was a baptism. I walked past the line of limousines and valets, my sensible shoes making a soft, rhythmic sound on the pavement. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I felt light, as if a great weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. The ice hadn't just been a shield. It had been a burden. And now it was gone. I didn't want to go home to my quiet house, not yet. I walked a few blocks and found a 24-hour diner, a brightly lit beacon in the dark city. The smell of grease, burnt coffee, and disinfectant was strangely comforting. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth and ordered a cup of tea. The waitress was a woman in her late 50s, with tired lines around her eyes, but a kind, no-nonsense manner. She brought my tea and was about to move on when she paused, looking at my face. I must have had an expression she had seen 1,000 times before at 2 a.m. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, her voice raspy from too many cigarettes. I just nodded. She topped up my water glass from a plastic pitcher. "You know," she said, leaning against the edge of the booth for a moment, "I've seen it all in this place. Broken hearts, broken deals, people running away from something, people running toward something. You look like you just burned a bridge." She looked me square in the eye. "Sometimes you gotta do that, just to get a little light, to see the path ahead." She gave me a wry smile, patted my shoulder, and went back to her coffee station. Her words, so simple and unadorned, landed with more wisdom than all the speeches at the gala combined. She was right. I had burned a bridge, and in the sudden glaring light, I could finally see. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael. "Mom, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I never knew." I read the words. They were the first honest words he had said to me in years. I pictured him typing them, alone, stripped of his wife's influence and the props of his false life. A flicker of the old maternal instinct flared up, the urge to reply, to soothe, to say, "It's okay." I put the phone down. I did not reply. It wasn't okay, and it was time he understood that. When I returned to my house, it felt different. The silence was not the silence of loneliness, but of peace. The worn armchair in the living room, the one with the faint imprint of Robert's body still in the cushions, felt like a throne. The books on the shelves felt like loyal friends. This was my sanctuary. This was my truth. The furniture wasn't old. It was tenured. It had earned its place. A week after the gala, my doorbell rang. It was Michael. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn jacket. He looked like a college student again. He stood on the porch, not even trying the doorknob. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual bluster. "Michael," I said, my hand on the doorknob, not opening the door any further. He shoved his hands in his pockets. I left her," he said, looking at his feet. "I'm staying on a friend's couch." "It's not much of a couch." He looked up, and his eyes were clear for the first time in years. "I got a job, bussing tables at the campus grill. It's a job." Bussing tables, the humiliation of it, for a man who had a country club membership a month ago, was profound, and in that humiliation I saw the first glimmer of hope. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a place to stay. He was just reporting a fact. He was starting over, from nothing. This was the small, specific action that cost him something. This was his earned redemption. I opened the door a little wider. "Forgiveness is a process, Michael. It's not a light switch. It starts with honesty." I stepped back. "Come in for a cup of tea." Later that evening, after he had gone, I sat at Robert's old desk. I took out the letter he had left me in the safe deposit box, the one I had been saving. My hands were steady as I opened it. It wasn't about the money. The portfolio was mentioned only once, in a postscript. "The money is just physics, Ellie, potential energy. You are the force that will decide how it is used." The letter itself was a love story. He wrote about our first apartment, the smell of the bakery, the wobbly table. He wrote about the day Michael was born, the feeling of his tiny hand wrapped around his finger. He thanked me for the life we had built, for my quiet strength, for being his anchor in a world of chaos. He ended the letter with a line that made me finally weep. Not tears of sadness, but of a deep, abiding love. "You were always the strongest one, Ellie. You just never had to be." I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hand, as the last light of day faded from the room. The house was quiet, but for the first time in a very long time, it wasn't empty. A year has passed. The world keeps turning. I did not buy a yacht or a penthouse. The potential energy Robert left me was not meant for that. Instead, I found a better use for it. I established the Robert Vance Scholarship for promising young physicists at the university where he had taught for 40 years. It provides a full ride for students from low-income backgrounds, Kids who have the brains but not the means. I sit in on the selection committee. I read their essays, their stories full of grit and dreams, and I see my Robert in their eyes. Sometimes I slip into the back of a lecture hall just to listen to the beautiful, elegant language of the universe being passed on to a new generation. It feels like coming home. I hear through Mr. Chen that Chloe moved to another state. Her social circle in our city had evaporated overnight. She works in retail now in a high-end boutique. I imagine she is surrounded by the beautiful things she always craved but can no longer afford. Some people's worlds are very small when you take away the stage. Michael is still bussing tables. He likes the work, he says. It's honest. He's taking night classes in accounting at the community college. Slowly, painstakingly, building something of his own. He comes over every Sunday. We don't talk much about the past. We talk about his classes, about the funny characters he meets at the restaurant. He is quieter now and more thoughtful. Last week, he brought me a gift, a small potted orchid, its single stem delicate but strong. He had bought it with his tips. He placed it on my windowsill where it could catch the morning sun. "I'll help you take care of it," he said. And he does. This morning, as I was watering it, I saw it. A new bud, a tiny, perfect green nub, pushing its way into the world. I touched it gently with my finger. It was a small, quiet promise of future beauty. I thought of Robert's letter, potential energy. The scholarship was potential energy. Michael, with his newfound humility and his accounting textbook, was potential energy. This tiny bud was potential energy. It all came back to physics. A single tear traced a path down my cheek and fell onto my hand. It was not a tear of sadness, or even of joy. It was a tear of quiet, profound peace. The long winter was over. The ice had melted, and in its place, something new and beautiful and true was finally beginning to grow. Thank you for listening to my story. It's funny. Sharing it makes the world feel a little bigger, and my own quiet house a little less lonely. I love to hear where you're listening from. It reminds me that we're all connected in ways we can't always see.